This is a lecture from Open Tuition. For the free lecture notes that go with this podcast, please visit opentuition.com.
Chapter 13 looks at performance measurement in not-for-profit organisations such as schools, hospitals and local authorities, town councils for example. And the measurement of performance in such organisations has some unique challenges. First of all, multiple objectives. What we're really doing is comparing not-for-profit organisations to profit-seeking organisations. Ultimately, a profit-seeking organisation, the prime objective is really to make profits. Okay, there might be lots of subsidiary objectives about customer satisfaction and cost per unit and so on, but everyone knows at the end of the day the purpose of that organisation is really focused on, one way or the other, getting good profits. But when you look, say, at a local authority administering a town, it has got many objectives, all of which it'd be very difficult to say this one's a higher or more important objective than another. So, for example, depending on the country you live in, the local authority might have some responsibility and therefore presumably objectives over maintaining roads, of repairing roads, of collecting rubbish, of perhaps maintaining schools in their area, of perhaps putting in certain services for elderly people and the like. So we have here maintaining roads, looking after elderly people, perhaps education comes under their remit, clearing rubbish from the streets and from people's houses and so on there. And it's difficult to say any one of those is definitely more important than the others, and indeed different stakeholders will be competing to get more of the local authorities' money spent on their particular area which they are interested in. So multiple objectives and indeed often competing stakeholders at the consumer level. Secondly, it is difficult in measuring output. Again, in a profit-seeking organisation, you can measure the number of units produced. You can measure the sales as quite convenient measures of, in a way, how busy you are or what you're getting for your money. But if you are, let's say, administering a hospital, what is the output of a hospital? Okay, it is presumably people coming through, but how are you going to be really measuring how much you maybe have improved their health and so on? Or in education, how are you going to measure how successful a school has been? You could look at exam results, but then a school which is perhaps in a deprived area, their exam results are going to be lower anyway, because maybe the children don't get parental support that they will in more middle class areas. And again, there are factors which come into measuring output which make it very difficult to compare the performance of different not-for-profit organisations. There are financial constraints, and often these financial constraints are almost politically or motivated, so they are. If the school wants more money to spend on its pupils, it can be very difficult for it to go and get that extra money if it's a publicly funded organisation. So very often what it has to do is to live within a cost constraint and do the best it can with the resources it's been given. Political, social, legal considerations. Legal considerations might be that a school in a particular area has to take every child of school age in that area, no matter how crowded the school is. Or a hospital has to accept patients who come. And again, this is making performance measurement more difficult to know how are we going to compare or measure or make allowances for performance if overcrowding becomes endemic. Often little competition. So there's one school in each area, one hospital in each area, they're not competing with each other. Competition is important for all sorts of reasons, but particularly in performance measurement here, we often measure performance by benchmarking. And if you don't have a direct comparison in your area, the town or the country, then getting a valid benchmark for which you can then use to set objectives is going to be quite difficult. There is no profit motive. I think we've probably covered that already, but a profit motive, we all agree that in a profit-seeking organisation this is a good way of measuring success in those organisations. It is of course absent here. However, we've got a bit of an empty space to see what's going to fill that vacuum. And finally, consumers are not necessarily the ones paying for goods. One of the things we might be able to say here is if you're not paying for something, there's no marginal cost to you for that, then consumers can be encouraged, not encouraged, but almost human nature will make you demand more and more and more of a resource for which you're not paying. So the marginal utility, the marginal usefulness might be very low, but this is no way of stopping people demanding more of it. And it can be difficult to say when the standard of service has got high enough. It's not something which is regulated by market forces anymore. It's regulated by, here's some money, you have to spend that, you have to spend it consumers, but consumers are not actually having to undergo any sort of payment penalty for using more and more, or indeed wasting that resource. One of the most useful approaches for talking about not-for-profit organisations is the 3 E's. And I look at it as a kind of hierarchy here. The first thing you have to decide is what is the proper purpose of that organisation? What should it be doing? And that is essentially its effectiveness. You can only be effective if you do what you think you should be doing. So in the UK we have our health service, and one of the things that the health service does not set out to do is to carry out cosmetic surgery. That's cosmetic surgery for reasons of vanity. If somebody thinks that their nose is the wrong shape, then in general the National Health Service is not going to pay for them to have their nose remodelled. Obviously, if you were involved in a bad accident, it would try and repair your face and so on, but it doesn't do plastic surgery for vanity. So that is simply outside its scope. It is simply not interested in this. This is not part of its measure of effectiveness. So we have to decide what should we do, and then when we decide what we should be doing, we have to make sure that we are doing that efficiently. And efficiency is really a measure between inputs and outputs. It's kind of looking at cost efficiency. So in a hospital, we know what certain operations cost. You can cost them up pretty precisely. The number of scalpels used, the number of sutures used, the number of people involved in the operating team and so on there. The difficulty to some extent then comes in balancing that with the output that you're going to be getting there. But nevertheless, for a particular operation or particular disease, there may be a choice of treatments. So in a hospital, if you have to have your appendix out, they could got a great big hole, great big incision down there. They could use the normal way, the traditional way of removing your appendix. Or what they might say is, right, we're going to try keyhole surgery, where they just poke through some little probes and so on. You go into the big opening and so on. And they should be looking at cost and benefits. So people with keyhole surgery tend to spend less time in hospital, but they tend to have slightly more complications afterwards. And they should also be looking at maybe different pharmaceuticals, different drugs, and what the benefits are coming out of that, because everybody's budget is going to be limited, and it's important that we spend these restricted resources efficiently. And finally, we have economy. Once we've decided on, let's say, which drugs we're going to use, then get into what you might call normal commercial contracts. Bulk buy, have skilled negotiators. Join together with some other hospitals so you can present yourself as a really big purchaser and get the best possible price you can out of your suppliers. So efficiency first, effectiveness first, then efficiency, then economy. It won't necessarily give you the answers, but it is a useful framework to be discussing performance measurement in not-for-profit organizations. Also within this section we cover value for money audits. How do we know that the local school is providing value for money, or the local authority is providing value for money in, let's say, its rubbish collection services? So it's whether or not the outputs have been achieved given the amount of inputs that we've been able to put into that. Or is there a cheaper, better, more efficient way of organising it? It says here, often we will go back to the 3 E's as a starting point. What do we want to do, effectiveness, and then look at the efficiency and the economy. It's largely subjective, because when you're looking particularly at the outputs, how good is education, how good is healthcare, how good is road maintenance, it can be quite difficult, or certainly quite subjective, to set up performance measures for those. And we're really saying, do we feel that the service is good value for money? And if we don't, have we any evidence for saying, well, there might be a better way of doing that? Perhaps instead of doing the local council doing something internally, it should maybe subcontract. And the government from time to time think this is the way to go. Subcontract, get contractors competing to win the tender, and this is the way of getting good value for money for your taxpayers. To measure it, benchmarking is very important. We can compare how one school is doing compared to another. What are the costs in one hospital compared to another? What sort of outputs are they getting from their different establishments? We need to establish performance indicators, although, as I said, that can be difficult. What is a valid performance indicator for education, or a valid performance indicator for road repairs? Should we have potholes repaired within 2 weeks? Does it depend on the size of the pothole? Should we vary the time depending on the time of the year? Because in winter many more potholes will open up than in summer, and so on. Best practice. Many types of organisation develop rules for best practice. This is what you have to do, and this is almost helping us to set what the performance indicators are. If you adhere to the measures which have been established in best practice, it takes some of the argument out of the situation. And finally, internal audit. Internal audit can be used within organisations, not-for-profit organisations as well, to try and keep tabs on their performance. Internal audit has often the time and the expertise to go round and try to measure, this is what is being spent and this is what you're getting for that. Is that good value for money? Here are suitable questions for chapter 13.